Good evening and welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us. I'm Liz Brailsford, President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth. We are thrilled to be partnering tonight with Arts and Letters Live to present this important and timely program featuring Pulitzer Prize winning historian and daughter of Texas, Annette Gordon-Reed. Tonight, we celebrate Juneteenth and reflect on its history and legacy, the challenges faced and the hard-won triumphs through the last 156 years, and the progress still to be made. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and now I'll pass it to Carolee.
Thanks, Liz. Hi, everyone. Carolee Klimchak with Arts and Letters Live here. I want to briefly introduce tonight's moderator and give some background on our special guest, who many of you probably already know and love, Opal Lee. Moderating tonight's conversation is Jonathan Holloway, who took the helm as the 21st president of Rutgers University last July. He is also a distinguished professor of U.S. history and previously served as provost at Northwestern and dean of Yale College. He has written several books, including one part history, part memoir titled Jim Crow Wisdom: Memory and Identity in Black America Since 1940. As a grad student, I had the pleasure of serving Professor Holloway as a teaching assistant for his course, African American History from Emancipation to the Present, which was an incredible class that you don't have to just take my word for. You can actually audit on demand for free online, as it was recorded in its entirety for public use via Yale's open courses. I have a great deal of admiration for Dr. Holloway, for his scholarship, teaching, and leadership, but also for his generosity of spirit, as he was much beloved at Yale for walking his two dogs on campus and stopping to chat with anyone and everyone. We're also grateful tonight that legendary community activist, retired educator, and Fort Worth resident Opal Lee will open the program momentarily. Of Ms. Lee's many accomplishments, her most renowned comes from her longtime advocacy to make Juneteenth an official national holiday to commemorate the end of slavery. In 2016, at the age of 89, she marshaled support and public education for this cause by creating Opal's Walk, a 1,400-mile walk from Fort Worth to Washington, D.C. Her petition to make the holiday nationally observed currently has 1.6 million signatures and counting. Last month, she re-released her book, Juneteenth, a children's storybook. Her work on Juneteenth has been covered by nearly every major news outlet and recognized by senators and celebrities alike. She also founded Opal's Farm, a 5-acre urban farm east of downtown Fort Worth to address local food deserts. Ms. Lee will open the program for us and also join in the last few minutes of tonight's conversation during the Q&A portion. Now, the one and only Ms. Opal Lee.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Opal Lee, a 94-year-old who gets in everybody else's business. I'm considered the grandmother of Juneteenth, but you need to know there's a national organization, the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation. I'd like to welcome you to this Arts and Letters live event at the Dallas Museum of Art. I'm going to get in the business of telling you about Annette Gordon-Reed. She's a wife, a mother, and an author. Her book, On Juneteenth, is compelling, it's factual, it's insightful. A must read. She's written other books, The Hemmings of Monticello, An American Family, which was a Pulitzer Prize winner. She calls New York and Cambridge home. Thanks for joining us, and let's celebrate freedom from the 19th of June to the 4th of July.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jonathan Holloway. I'm the president at Rutgers University. Tonight, I get to take my presidential hat on and put on a hat that feels so nice at times like this. I'm a historian of the African American past, and it is a real thrill that tonight that we have a friend, a scholar, a giant, Annette Gordon-Reed, as the guest of honor, and who will be engaging in conversation about her latest book, On Juneteenth. It is also very exciting that we have, as you just heard in the introduction, Miss Opal Lee, a legend, who will be joining us in conversation towards, well, a little bit further into the program. Very exciting opportunity for all of us here. And really, what an exciting day, period. In the green, I will confess, I've been locked in meetings all day long. And I think during the green room, Annette said, what a great moment. I'm like, what headline did I miss? And so I just found out 15 minutes ago that the Senate voted to make Juneteenth a national holiday. So this is, the story's not done, of course, but the fact that this has happened on the evening that we have Annette Gordon-Reed joining us and Miss Opal Lee, who's been advocating for this for years and years, let's not lose sight of how special this moment is. So I'm just going to jump right in, and I'm going to start with a quote. And this is actually from Annette, from the penultimate paragraph of your book. Your last paragraph is just one sentence. Mm-hmm. But the penultimate paragraph I found so striking. And I think it for me, it provides an entryway for us to talk about this book and how you came to this project. Mm-hmm. And in that penultimate paragraph, you say, about the difficulties of Texas, love does not require taking an uncritical stance toward the object of one's affections. In truth, it often requires the opposite. We can't be of real service to the hopes we have for places, and people ourselves included, without a clear-eyed assessment of their and our strengths and weaknesses. That often demands a willingness to be critical, sometimes deeply so. How that is done matters, of course. Striking the right balance can be exceedingly hard. This struck me as a I've no other way to put it, but a powerfully human moment in this book. Now, historians are humans, but you know, we are trained to write often in antiseptic ways. We are trained only to use the third person because we were not there ourselves. Mm-hmm. But this is a different book. Mm-hmm. I mean, you deploy the skills, your powerful skills as a historian. The book has a voice that is about keeping things at a distance, as we are trained to do. And yet, this is a short book that has an intimacy to it, and that intimacy is your life and your family's life. So, mm-hmm. you know, as someone who is trained not to do these things, why don't you tell us how you came to do this and why you came to do this?
Okay. Well, thank you very much for segueing into this. I came to do this because when I was growing up, I always thought I wanted to be a writer. That's what I thought would be my profession. I would be doing something writing. And at some point I decided that that was not a practical thing to do, to be a writer, a novelist, and so forth. So I grew up writing short stories and grew up writing essays on my own. And so this was a return to the kind of writing that I always thought that I would do, that would be more intimate. I mean, becoming a historian, I thought that I would be able to enjoy history just on its own, reading it. And then I wrote my first book, and then my life changed, and that's how I became a historian. But this is something that I've always wanted to do. It was difficult at first to get comfortable with the idea of talking about myself and talking about my family and speaking, I and we, thinking about my mother and my father and my relatives. It was tough to do, but it sort of took me back to where I started. And I had done an essay for the New Yorker about On Juneteenth, just, about the holiday Juneteenth, talking about how we celebrated it when I was a child, and a little bit about the day itself, the history of the day itself. And I'd done for the New York Review of Books, a review of 5 books about Texas. So Texas has been on my mind for the past couple of years. And while we were going through the pandemic, and I was here in New York, Harvard had gone virtual, and so there was no reason for me to go down to Cambridge. I usually commute between the two cities. I stayed here in New York, and there was, nothing else to do besides occasionally going to the store, walking in the park for exercise. And my editor we talked a little bit about it, and I decided to go ahead and write something. We wanted to had thought about writing a big book about Texas. We've been talking about that for a time, but I wanted to do something, as you said, intimate, something smaller and accessible to lots of people, to talk about Texas through Juneteenth, the road leading to it and the road afterwards, but mainly to explain the state to people, because there are a lot of weird stories come out of Texas. And I'm always all of my life, having to explain to people, well, and so this book was my way of trying to make explicable something that seems inexplicable to people.
So this is a book, as you've made it quite clear, this is a book, made it quite clear right now, and in the book itself, this is a book about remembrance, about commemoration, in what I'll call for now official ways. This is about remembrance and commemoration in very personal ways. But this is a story about what is recognized by states and may become recognized by the federal government. We'll see. But it is a story about Texas itself. I mean, you just said it explicitly. This is a Texas history, which is ironic given how Texans love to talk about how big things are, and you've written a small book about Texas. But there's a lot in it, and I'm just, I was, as a historian, I'm doing a lot of Juneteenth talks these days, and wrote just because I can't go to this event on Saturday, wrote a page-long thing to be read today. Wrote it today to be read on Saturday. And it was really about why are we worrying about a Texas holiday in New Jersey? So, being provocative. So,
yes.
Like, Texas is outsized in so many ways, but like, I'm being a bit facetious, but I think it will help pull out some things. Like, why should we be worrying about Texas history? What does it have to tell us?
Well, because the day that we're celebrating was a day that made possible because of the triumph of the United States Army over the Army of the Trans-Mississippi, the Confederate Army of the Trans-Mississippi. They had kept fighting after Lee surrendered in April and finally gave up at the beginning of June. And that's when Gordon Granger could go to Galveston and make his announcement, because the Union forces of the Army of the United States could take over that theater. And that's where he went to come and to take control of that area. Well, they were the last group of people who were freed by the military conflict, as a result of the military conflict. I think the defeat of the Confederacy, of the Confederate Army, was an important milestone. And we know that it was made possible by the contributions, the enlistment of thousands of Black men who went to fight for freedom. Everybody says, well, what were they fighting for? Some people say the Union. They were fighting to end slavery. And this was their victory. And they were in Galveston. And this was a moment, not just for Texas, this was a moment in the United States history, as Texas is a part of the Union. Something that happens there affected the entire Union. And I think it was a moment, the end of the defeat of the military effort to maintain chattel slavery, I think was a moment in human rights, in world history. I mean, and every time we have something like that, there's so many bad things that happen in the world, but when the world tends to try to make a step in the right direction, we should acknowledge that. And it happened in Texas. I think that, obviously it wasn't the legal end of slavery. We know that comes with the ratification of the 13th Amendment. Yes. But we also know that emancipation was a process. African Americans were emancipating themselves, running away from the plantations. So I think it makes sense to have this day where we can talk about all the other forms of emancipation. It doesn't just happen to be Granger, but we could talk about the Emancipation Proclamation. We could talk about the fall of Richmond. We could talk about St. Augustine. I saw an article the other day that they have a special day that they celebrate. all of that can be subsumed within this day. We worry about it because Texans were pretty chauvinistic about carrying this holiday everywhere they went. When they moved from Texas, the Texas diaspora was very, very insistent about this. So I think it comes from people who have been doing this since 1866, since the anniversary of the day, and we've kept that alive all these years, and that's why it's here. That's why you're celebrating it.
I think that, thank you. So many different paths to take from that. You mentioned a few moments ago emancipation as a process, but involving you mentioned specific moments in time in specific places.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I found so enriching in this book is that, I mean, for a short book, my goodness, it is covering, it leads us into so many different spaces in ways that I find really exciting. And one of the things I'd love to hear from you more about is that while this is a Texas history, this is a history that is really very complicated as far as, if we have a certain visual image of what a Texan looks like, if we have a certain image of what an enslaved person looks like, you're saying, wait a second, it's a lot more complicated than that. And it's not just a white-black story. It's a many different things kind of story. And to me, that strikes me as a really important part of this broader history. Certainly, I mean, I'm very interested always in trying to sort out what we mean in this country when we talk about belonging.
Yes.
Belonging to what and who belongs. And that's, I mean, you're talking about that in this text and in really complicated ways. And I wonder if you can, I'm being a bit oblique, so you can help explain it a bit for the audience. Speaking about the faceted nature of what it means to be a Texan, what it means to belong, and what it means to celebrate some sort of state of freedom.
Well, I start out talking in the book about the image of Texas. Texas has an image. It has been constructed, I say, as a white man. When people think of Texans, they think of a cowboy, even though we know that many cowboys were black, but that's not the Hollywood presentation of cowboys. So you think of cattle rancher, or you think of oilman, the person who's the wildcatter who strikes it rich and in the oil business. That's the image. The vulgar Texan, nouveau riche Texan, those kinds of caricatures and stereotypes. But what you don't see is the plantation owner. You don't see the people who came as at the behest and the beckon and the call of Stephen F. Austin, the father of Texas, who brought settlers into Texas who were slave owners, enslavers, and who expected to use that labor system to make their way in the world. It's a place of Latinos, Spanish, Mexican, indigenous people, African Americans. All of those people are Texans. And the thing about Texas is that it was not a place that became diverse over time. It was a place where all of those people were there. The diversity was there from the beginning. And it has, shaped the nature of the place, made it a very volatile place. But as long as people have thought of it primarily as the West, with the cattle, and cattle drives and so forth, and not thought of it as a place of a plantation society, the racial problems in Texas may not make sense to people. When they hear things about them, is what is that about? What does this have to do with cowboys? What does it have to do with, the range? But it was a plantation society. And it was the plantation society. And I talk a little bit in the book about the fact that you have to wind the tape back even earlier here. The first person of African descent that we know by name who was in Texas was a man named Estebaneco. When I was a kid, in our 4th or 7th grade, we had 4th and 7th grade history, Texas history, and you could take an elective in high school, so you could have a lot of Texas history. He was called Esteban, and he was mentioned only in passing. And I wanted to write about him because if you were to ask most people when blacks came to North America or were brought to North America, they would say 1619. think of Jamestown in Virginia. But Estebanco was there in the 1520s with Spanish explorers. There were other unnamed people from of African descent who were in that area, in the area called Texas, and that became Mexico. And they were doing a lot of things. Some of them left the expeditions and went off on their own. They mixed with the people that they encountered, whom they encountered in, Texas and in Mexico and Central America. And Estebanco ends up with a group of men, including Cabeza de Vaca, who are traveling across Texas and Mexico to the Pacific seaboard. He is serving as a translator between the indigenous people and the Spaniards. He was talented in languages. And I sort of muse in the book about what difference it would make to have him as a part of the whole story of Africans in North America, not just plantation slavery. So that complexity that is there from the richness that's there from the beginning has been shrunk down to a narrative that I think is more comfortable, not thinking about slavery, not thinking about racial problems, and thinking more about the characters of the sort of masculine notion of Texas, fighting those kinds of things, and not really zeroing in on how complicated the society actually was from the very beginning.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I tell a story on myself, but it speaks to the mythology of Texas, which is where you started your answer. My first time in Texas, I was driving cross country by myself from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., where my parents lived. It's before I started graduate school. And I had godparents living in San Antonio, which I'd never been to that part. Well, I'd never been in Texas. Mm-hmm. So I started in El Paso one morning thinking, I'm just driving to San Antonio. How far can this be?
Well,
and West Texas is not the most populated place. And this was some 32 years ago. Mm-hmm. In any event, I get to San Antonio after a very long day. And the next day, my godfather takes me, he goes, we're going to go around San Antonio, and takes me to the Alamo. Mm-hmm. And which was much smaller than I imagined, mm-hmm. was filled with tourists. I mean, as I was myself. Mm-hmm. And then I'm walking around, and then I'm reading the signs as a future history nerd, like really reading them. Like, wait a second, this is nothing as I thought it was. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure the signs, China has changed radically since that 32 years ago moment. Mm-hmm. But in my mythic notion of Texas, the Alamo was a place of Texan victory, mm-hmm. and not of defeat that turns into something else. So it speaks mm-hmm. to the ways in which, in this case, Texas has a mythology that could be overwhelming and that can erase like mythologies do. And since I know, we all know that while you're writing about an event that got started in 1865 as an event, I mean, there's a longer history, of course, but this is a very current story about mm-hmm. things that are washed away, that are not being talked about. And I'm going to bring us to the present day. I mean, this is the Texas state legislature is, wrestling with whether they're going to allow the teaching of legacies of slavery. And they are not the first state to do so. I mean, they are part of a tradition. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, I mean, you have written this really evocative book of Texas history mm-hmm. that it makes it very clear, at least if in thought-provoking ways, what if Texas history started here with this individual? Mm-hmm. What if Texas history involved these other people?
Yes.
It creates a whole different understanding. So I just wonder, what you tell those state legislators about about the value of history. I mean, what are they? I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Well, it's an interesting kind of thing, because if you think about 1836, which is the beginning of the Texas Republic, there's a constitution of the Republic of Texas, and the Constitution of the Republic of Texas talks about slavery. It promotes protects slavery, explicitly does so. And it says African American people can't be citizens. They can't migrate there. They can't come there to live without permission. I mean, it's very, very plain this is a white man's government. This is a white man's place. And, it's not like the United States Constitution where they talk in these furtive tones about persons held to service. I mean, this is up front, no holds barred. How are you going to talk about the Republic of Texas without reading the Constitution? And so you have to do that. I really don't understand. It would be interesting to talk to some of them to think, what are you going to do? I mean, how are you going to get around this? Because, I said that people act as if we've just sort of invented race as a subject. But people in the 18th century and the 19th century, they talked about race all the time. It was the subject of legislation, letters, actions, all throughout the country. So this isn't something that we just thought up to think about. They took that very, very seriously. So what I would tell them is that you can't educate people if you don't tell the truth. And this is not a matter of interpretation. And it's not like I'm interpreting that there was slavery in Texas. And no, it's blatantly there in the documents and the support for it. The Texas Declaration of Independence, which is, I say in the book, sort of a knockoff of Jefferson's structure for the American Declaration, with the grievances and everything, except they leave out, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, because they don't want that. Those words, we make fun of those words now and say, well, he didn't mean it, or they didn't mean it, that wasn't important. But people did take that seriously, and they took it seriously enough to say, we're not putting that in, and repudiating that aspect of it. So I would say to them that they have to have faith in people, enough faith in young people to know that there's good and that there's bad. Mm-hmm. And you also, unless you agree with those sentiments of those people in the past, you ought to be able to say, those were the views they held at the time. We repudiate those views. We're doing other things. We move on. And that's what happens in life. You hope that people there is some notion of progress, that people do things better, but there's sort of a defensiveness about it that is really kind of interesting. It's like you're making a judgment about them personally.
Yes.
If you bring these things up, and that's not it at all. And you can't get anywhere without telling the truth about situations.
I think that's beautifully said, and it really, I think this kind of argument is often seen as a highly politicized one, which I don't understand it that way at all. Mm-hmm. It's like, we're not saying you present day person are bad, or you are not saying you present day person are good. What we are saying is that we need to wrestle with difficult things in our past, mm-hmm. and this is the way we become better, period, no matter what our political position is that we develop the skill of disagreement, of interpretation, of argument, of critical thinking. All of these things are very important. And look, I think, I'll speak for myself, this is a rather amazing country. Amazing because it's held together as long as it has in the way that it has, but it is not without its flaws. Yeah. And the more we talk about them, the more chance there is of a more perfect union. I think it's just work that is an ongoing project. Now, you mentioned the Texas Constitution as being a knockoff of Jefferson's
the Declaration.
I'm sorry, the Declaration being a knockoff. And I believe the audience understands that you are a rather important scholar of Jefferson, a very complicated person.
Yes.
And with your really award-winning, I'll just leave it award-winning, important book, The Hemingses of Monticello, An American Family, with the subtitle is probably the most important part of it for me, in thinking through the complications, I'll just call it the complications of Jefferson's relationship with Sally Hemings, and on down the line, all the implications of what this means. But if we think about, you said earlier, that people in the 18th and 19th century were talking about race. They were talking about citizenship. I mean, Jefferson's story affirms all of that. I mean, that's, you know, his history really, and it's a flawed, he's a flawed individual, great in many ways, flawed in many other ways. But it does tell us that we have been wrestling as a people with issues of race and belonging and citizenship the entire time. This is not a new story. So you said earlier, we've been talking at the level of sort of one historian to another. And I want to, this is also a very intimate book, as I said earlier from the very start. And, you know, that you took the time to invoke your personal narrative, your family's narrative. And I mean, how has your family received this book? I mean, what are their feelings about this book, if you can share with them, share them?
Well, my parents are no longer living. One of my brothers is no longer living. My living brother is very happy about it. Other cousins and people are very proud of it. They've, you know, arranged for me to be on interviews in Texas and doing various things, and their Facebook postings about it. So people are happy about it. What I tried to do in writing was to just give enough of a part of my family's story to basically as an entree into writing about Texas.
Yes.
But I think they have found it a good thing, an interesting thing. They've learned some things about the family that they didn't know, as I did when I was going through this, writing the book. It's been a good experience all around. People from Conroe, some of my mother's friends, have written to me about it and expressed their pride in me, which is wonderful because, you know, my parents are not here. To have their friends, people that I knew growing up, say nice things really means a lot to me. It's very so it's an emotional kind of thing to have that, to have those kinds of connections. I can't wait to be able to go down there.
I bet.
You know, I was really, I was hoping that things might open up sooner and that some of this could be done in person, but there'll be other times as well. I'll be down there again.
I think Texas will welcome you, absolutely. And you know, it's a fascinating state. My sister used to live there, my nephew still does. And boy, sort of microcosm of this country with all of the different contradictions and beautiful aspects.
Beautiful aspects and difficult aspects.
Yes,
it's just,
that's right.
Yeah.
It's a difficult kind of beauty. So I wonder, I mean, I'm lightly here. Have you had any members of the family say, "Oh, Annette, you didn't get that right. That's not what, you know, that's not my memory of this."
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. I'm waiting for that to. I think once all of the initial glow wears off of all of this, they will probably get that. And that's the great thing about this. I mean, I saw this when I was working on, you know, Jefferson and Hemmings, different branches of the family, different branches of his family, his legal family were told different things about this, and it only makes sense because some people know things that the other people don't know. But I'm waiting to hear the story because I actually would like to. This has made me want to look even more into particularly my great grandfather's story down in Galveston. I write about him in the chapter entitled On Juneteenth. I had known that he'd worked on the wharves. He and my great grandmother had a cotton farm, but he would go down to Galveston to work on the wharves to get extra money seasonally to do that. And I didn't think anything at all about that until I was working on this. And Galveston, I grew up thinking of it mainly as a beach town, but of course it was the most important city in Texas before Houston became the most, you know, Dallas, I don't want to say this, because Houston became an important city. And there were Black men working on the wharves. They had a union. It was a big deal. I think that I would like to write an article about that. I would really like to investigate that whole thing more to try to figure out, you know, how did he come to be there? You know, what was it like to be a seasonal worker like that? This whole notion of Black men being in a union and agitating for their rights. This is like, not so long after slavery, right?
Yes.
It's an amazing, I'm fascinated by people who lived in this time that's under the shadow of this unimaginable system, and yet they're doing stuff.
I mean, that I, as a fellow historian, I absolutely understand this. It is, moments when the resilience of human character becomes clear, the determination to, own one's own humanity become clear, are really exciting moments. Was there a moment in the text, or maybe in the process of producing the text, that caught you by surprise? Sort of like, either like, I hadn't thought about it this way. I mean, I know you've been working through these things for a while, so I mean, I say this. It's okay to say no, not really. But
yeah, no, I said a moment that brought me up short was when I found my great grandfather's name on a voter registration list in 1867. And this is a couple of years after Juneteenth. And
yes.
He was in Madison County. And the funny thing about it is, I recall going to visit Madison with my grandmother and her sister. And it was a long trip from Livingston, where they lived, and I visited. And we went a couple of times, and we saw relatives there. But that was sort of in the back of my head. But I never pieced together why, what connection we had. And so then I see this registration list, and it's in Madison, and it made me, I immediately flashed back to that visit with my grandmother. And, they lived there. So a branch of my family must have been there. I thought of them, there were towns that I associated with them mainly, but just because as a historian, I mean, just because that's where I encountered them and that's where I thought they lived, they were doing all, I mean, they could, they moved places, they did things, they came back. And so that was an amazing moment for me, because I thought of this person who's, slavery's over just a couple of years, and he's there wanting to, planning to participate in an election. And I know what happened. We know what happens not long after that, when they pull the Reconstruction ends and stuff is shut down for, until the mid 1960s. And now here we are now, back fighting about registration and voting. And you can see how important voting is, and the role, the sort of tentative nature, the sort of, well, for some people, controversial nature of Black participation is in the franchise. And that's always been a pivotal moment. So that was a moment that, really made me choke up in a way, to think about this person who had faith and who was going to go forward with his life with this newfound right.
That's really powerful. I'm reminded of an exercise a former colleague of mine put. I was in a room where she was giving a lecture, and she said, imagine yourself as a child and think of the oldest person you hugged. So this, and she said, I'll summarize, this takes you back generations. And think of when that person was a child, the older person they hugged. I mean, hugging is an intimate act. It's proximate. We all know what it feels like. And she described that within, we are 5 hugs from Shakespeare or something like that. But, you're 2 hugs from what you're just talking about. I mean, and that is, when we talk about the passage of time in these kinds of ways, it feels a little less abstract. Like, it is really not that long ago.
No, not that long ago at all.
Yeah, and it is shocking how quickly things can change. And well, heck, we're living in one of those moments right now. And for me, thinking about Juneteenth specifically as a holiday, as what I'll call, in a larger way, an emergent holiday, if that, I know it's not emergent in Texas, it's been there for a while. But in terms of a national consciousness, I am curious to, well, I'll preface this even further. As Juneteenth was discovered nationally last year, as corporations discovered Juneteenth, I think this is all wonderful and great,
Hmm.
but I am very worried about 3 years from now.
Hmm.
Will Juneteenth still matter? Now, it's going to matter in Texas. I don't have any doubt about that.
Yeah.
And, who knows with what the Senate did today, if that will change things in the national conversation. But I'm just curious. I mean, what are your thoughts about, we know your thoughts on Texas. We know
Yeah.
what about the actual holiday itself?
Yeah. Well, I've talked with a number of people about this, and there is a fear of the commodification, the
Mhm.
commercialization of it. I mean, but this is the United States of America.
Yes.
Everything is going to get commercialized. I mean, you're not going to do anything if you if you think that that's not going to happen. It may not happen at some level. I just think we have to ride herd on it. I
Hmm.
mean, the people who are really interested in it, who remain interested in it, I think not just Texans will remain interested. I think historians will.
Hmm.
People who write about the historians of slavery, historians of the Black experience. I think historians of American history in particular um, are going to be interested in what happens here. And it's such an opportunity for education. It's a holiday that lends itself because you have to explain who Granger was. You have to explain, why did it take 2 years? The history, the educational possibilities are built into it.
Yes.
And I worry about the possibility that it becomes, slick or whatever. But I have faith. I think people, there will be a core band of people, and who will take it seriously and will continue to tell the story and explain why it's important. I mean, Christmas is commercialized to some people, but there are many people who take it very seriously, or
Yes.
Easter take it very seriously. So, I'm hopeful. That's not an excuse. I mean, I think that's not a reason not to have it as a holiday.
Yes.
To be concerned. At first I mentioned in the book that I was originally a little peeved that it had sort of moved outside of Texas because
Yes.
it belonged to us, to Black people in Texas. But I don't feel that way anymore. And I hope the House follows up with this and does the right thing.
I'm very curious to see that. So tonight we have the great fortune, speaking of Juneteenth, to have Miss Opal Lee in with us, and she, I know, has been working on this project of Juneteenth for some time. So Miss Lee, are you? Can you hear us right now?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Just wanted to check. In this remote world, one never knows from moment to moment. I wonder if you could, before we open this up to broader questions, if you can give us a sense of your own history with Juneteenth and the work that you've done and how you feel with the Senate action that was taken, the United States Senate action taken today.
I I'm so jubilant about it that I don't know how to express it.
Mm.
And I'm on the phone talking to a young fellow who heads the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation. That's the group I belong to. And so now we're trying to see how many votes we got in the House and how many more we got to have. And I'm wondering if I'm going to have to go up there and tell them young people we want the the, the bill passed. I'm excited about it. I really am. And this is awfully close to having it declared a national holiday.
It is. It is.
Really.
I have a question here that's come up in the chat that I'm going to go with Ms. Opal first. If you could create the perfect Juneteenth celebration on a national scale, what might it include?
Well, it would include the fact that we would be celebrating from the 19th of June to the 4th of July. We weren't free on July 4, 1776. So if we're going to have freedom, let's have freedom. And I keep saying that it's freedom for everybody because we're not free yet. And I mean, I'm not talking about Black people aren't free yet. I'm talking about people in general. We've got so many disparities that we need to address. Homelessness, that's not a Black thing. Joblessness, that's not a Black thing. health care? Did I get the same that you do when I go to the hospital? Climate change, the justice system, all these things are not just Black things. And so we need to be about the business of deciding if we're going to be all that we can be, and if we're going to accept the fact that we all bleed red blood and that we are sisters and brothers under the skin, and that we need to address these disparities, not as Black, not as white, Asian, or Mexican, but we've got to work together to dispel them.
That's a beautiful sentiment. I remember when I was at a former university that did not recognize Martin Luther King's birthday as a holiday, and when they finally decided to do so, we had to make it clear, those of us teaching African American studies, this was not a day off. I mean, for us, this was a day of work and of education. And in Juneteenth, I imagine, certainly for historians, at least I would hope also for Texans in general, that this is a day of work. And I think, Ms. Lee, you talked about these different aspects in terms of employment, education, and health that Juneteenth can include. I mean, it's sort of the work of recognizing the humanity that we all share together. I think that's an important thing for us to think about when it comes to Juneteenth. Annette, Ms. Lee, yes, you're about to say something? Well,
I'm wanting people to know that the Juneteenth that we put on have educational components with it. They have the music. The young people get together from different nationalities and they learn songs. They work a week. They give a concert. Art. The children, 800 school children, were given 12 freedoms gained. People were able to name themselves, to keep their children, to learn to read and write, to buy property, learn how to dress, dress the way they wanted to. There were 12 of those, and the children were able to draw what they felt like that meant. And 300 of them were jurors. The music, the art, the Miss Juneteenth pageant, I want you to know I was in it. I wasn't Miss Juneteenth, but I was in the pageant. I want you to know there's a Juneteenth play. Greg Ellis, who used to be with the Cowboys or something, has authored a play. There's so many things attached to Juneteenth rather than just the festival. We gave away food that people needed. I started to say acres of food, but I meant pounds and pounds of food. Juneteenth, I say, if I haven't said it already, needs to be celebrated from the 19th of June to the 4th of July. I can see it having elements of a state fair where you got these components over here and people are able to go, they can see what's happening here. And it takes some time. One day is really not enough.
You're talking about a pageant. I mean, I'm using that word in sort of an old-fashioned way, a pageant of what it means to be an American, it seems, in a really sort of powerful way. And I wonder if Annette, if I can turn it to you, when I mentioned earlier thinking about the Alamo and mythology, and I had the story completely wrong as a tourist and was embarrassed by that. But a lot of people have this story wrong, and that's what mythology does. And I wonder if we're talking, Miss Lee was talking about all these different aspects of Juneteenth and what it has been and what it could be. It's a lot of complexity. And Annette, are people ready for the complexity?
I think so. I mean, some people are not, obviously, as witnessed by some of the things that are going on in the state legislatures around the country. But I think people hunger for this. One of the things that we've discovered at Monticello is, for the longest time, there were people who came to the mountain and complained when people would talk about slavery, and they were coming. It's like, wait a minute, you're coming to a slave plantation. What do you expect?
Mhm.
But now we find groups of people who come who want to learn more than just here's the pretty china, the
Mm.
nice dining table, and so forth. They want to know about the enslaved people who lived on the mountain and so forth. I think people are ready for things. We don't really see, that isn't shown as much, I would say, in the media. I mean, the media obviously focuses a lot on negative things that people are against, but not so much what people are for. And I do think that people are ready for that. I would think of some wonderful thing on the mall, on the National Mall. Miss Lee is talking about a sort of almost an exposition type atmosphere with different, pavilions, different exhibits, different kinds of things all around. And that could happen in different places, but I think she's absolutely right. And I was suggesting this before too, that it's a holiday that really lends itself to education and art and all those kinds of things. And the other thing that I would say is that it's what it was for me, and a number of people have said this to me as I've been, talking over this past couple of weeks, that it's a family holiday. That family is really, really important. And if you think about enslaved people and the greatest fear that they had, whipping would be bad. Obviously, working for no pay is bad. But the thought, the fear of losing your relatives, having your children sold away from you, your husband sold away from you, your mother, and what happened after slavery when people wandered around, looking for their relatives, trying to gather everybody together. That's a part of this holiday. It recognizes that the will to come together, family, and then community, not just your blood relatives, there's that, but the people whom you love, gathering everybody together. So I think that that feature of it has to be emphasized as well, how important that is, the family component of it, because from people who were dispersed violently and without their consent, the loss of their relatives. And so gathering people together is a big component as well. Education and family, the two go hand in hand with Juneteenth.
One of the more poignant for me moments in the books, I identified it with some work I was doing in a project, was I won't get the story exactly right, but you, adult Annette, writing with misgivings about not having taken advantage of the opportunity to listen to the stories or to get the stories from the elders in your family. And that is, I mean, speaking about Juneteenth as an opportunity to bridge generations, to bring families together, literal and figurative. For me, it's an opportunity. That's where I think education needs to happen as well. That that a younger generation needs to listen to that. The people they were hugging. Go back to what I was saying before, to hear about their experiences and such. And I'm, in that notion of sort of personal past, this is a question for both of you. I'll go to Miss Lee first. If you have a memory of the first time you celebrated or learned about Juneteenth, and what was that like? And I know Annette writes about some of these early memories herself in the book in really beautiful ways. But Miss Lee, I wonder if you could reflect on that for us.
I was born in Marshall, Texas. And so in my early age, what would happen for Juneteenth, we'd go to the fairground. There'd be baseball and food. There'd be music and food. And the children could just run all over the place and nobody stop them and tell them they're going to get hurt and all that stuff. And food. Oh, I tell you, it was almost like Christmas. Do you hear?
Mm-hmm.
We loved Juneteenth, and our parents got to visit with the folk who would come from around the country to enjoy Juneteenth in Marshall, Texas. So Juneteenth to me does mean family. My family is huge. My mother was a fifth child of 19. My grandparents had 3 sets of twins. And I spent time on that farm. And when it was time for June, we got the day off. We didn't have to work that day. How about that? But Juneteenth has the opportunity to bring people together, not just your blood kin, not just the people that look just like you. And there are people of other nationalities that are celebrating Juneteenth because none of us are free. I keep repeating, none of us are free until we're all free.
That's an important message to carry on. That's for sure. Annette, I remember reading in your book this, again, a beautiful moment. If I remember correctly, you were a younger child. I'll say 8 or 9. I may not be right on that. Probably not. But sitting there for hours making tamales,
Yes.
as part of that the creative act of celebration and sort of the wisdom of elders, not the adults thinking, oh man, what I should have been paying more attention. I shouldn't have been grouchy during that whole time. But I wonder if that's a certain kind of childhood memory of getting ready for Juneteenth. I mean, what is that your first memory, or is that?
That's not my first memory, but it was a vivid memory, and I think it's a memory that encapsulates the diversity of Texas. I mean, we had people there who were, the traditional, what we would call soul food, Southern cuisine, barbecue, Texas barbecue brisket, and red soda water,
Yes.
and tamales that my grandmother would make to sell to raise money for the St. Luke's United Methodist Church. They were building a church, and so at holidays, people would place orders for tamales from her, and Juneteenth was always a time when they placed a lot of them, and we had to make. And I talk in the book about being a kid and patient there, making tamales, but how much I, wish I could do that now. And also, as you said, not talking to my great grandmother, who was alive until I was about 11, more about her life and her mother's life and so forth. But I do have memories of it. And what I remember most about Juneteenth is the same thing that Miss Lee remembers, is family. And that's what I associated with the time when family and community, when adults came over and in the yard, my grandfather barbecuing, us running around throwing firecrackers, just a festive moment. But when I got to be older and did a couple of times talk to my great grandmother, it was impressed upon me how important this day was. Because as you said, we're not too close. We're so close to that time period, not too far from it at all. And it was something that was a deeply important holiday for her, my great grandmother, and my grandmother as well, because they knew people. Her mother had been born a slave and had been freed as a child by her father, actually, and along with her mother. And my great grandmother's mother had one of her husbands, her other husband had died, was enslaved until the end of the Civil War. So they knew people who had been in that institution. And my grandmother did, and I knew my grandmother. So it's just, not far from that at all.
Yeah. So did you, I'm just curious, this is a Texas history, it's a family history, and you just talked a bit about your family. You're a professional historian, but are you also the family historian? I mean,
No.
you? Oh, okay.
No, I'm not the family historian. On my father's side, they had a cemetery, and this is the highway came and wanted to use and took the land. So what they ended up doing is they moving people, and they put a record of everybody. So I know, you know, pretty far back in my on my father's side, the family, and my mother's as well. Everybody hits that 1870 Black people, the 1870 wall, because they're enslaved people are not in the census before then. But you're able to find out when they asked when they took the census, they asked people where where they were born and where their father was born. So I'm able to get back to people, you know, where their parents were born, and I know some of them were born in, well, one in Texas, at least it would have been in the 1820s, and others in Alabama and Georgia at some earlier period of time. But you know, I probably should become the family historian. I mean, it's sort of odd that I know all about the Randolphs and the Hemmingses and all these people. And I know my family, but now I really want to sort of get all the nuances and make all of the connections that I can.
It is so interesting as a professional historian, this tension between the profession and the personal. And what I love about the book is that you're bringing both together, but I recognize I've written a book in sort of the same vein. It still remains a tension about, you know, at what point do you allow it to be official history? At what point does it become personal? And how do you keep them apart, if you should at all? I mean, if you should at all. Miss Lee, I wonder, would people look at you as the family historian? I mean, I know people look at you in legendary terms for your work on Juneteenth as the larger family, certainly.
My daughter is the one who is the historian, and I mean, she goes all out for it. We have family reunions every 2 years, and the girl has her charts when she goes to the reunion, and she yanks these people in and shows them where they are on the chart and all that good stuff. I have information that I passed on to her. For instance, my grandfather was not a slave, but his mother was. She was a runaway slave. And his name brought us, the family name we use. There was absolutely nobody in that community named Broadus. So nobody knows where Broadus came from. Now, I've read books, and the one I've read, tells me about a Broadus plantation. That Harriet Tubman was on that Broadus plantation. I have no idea if this great grandmother came from there or what. I'd like to trace it, but I'm kind of busy with Juneteenth.
Yes, you are.
Other things, and I ain't got around to it yet.
Yes, you are. You know, for the audience there, one of the things I hope you're picking up is the desire for these two speakers to understand or awareness of the family past, or or members of their family who are aware of the family past, but also the challenges of trying to, within the African American community, of trying to keep track of this past. I mean, at some point, what I'll call official records stop cooperating, and it relies on the family, the family members at the reunions keeping the oral histories and keeping the narratives down, and then wondering where family comes from. I tell a very quick story. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, and in 4th grade, we went to Yorktown. That was just what 4th grade students did in the public school system. And I remember sitting in a church pew, frankly being bored out of my mind as the tour guide was talking about something related to, at this point we were in Williamsburg, and a Williamsburg that at that point did not talk about Africans or at all. They were half the population.
Yeah, 75%.
Yeah. And a friend of mine sitting next to me, the tour guide was talking about the names of the people who were important. Their names were written in the pew sides. These were the benefactors. And he looked over and nudged me. Remember, my name's Jonathan Holloway. My family's from the Virginia Beach area, and one side of my family. The pew the name carved in the side of the pew is John Holloway. So it's this very strange moment where that could have been a relative of mine, but the ability to know is probably lost to time and circumstance. So for me, when I think about something like Juneteenth, this moment of calling forth family, literal and figurative, for me, it's doing more than just celebrating a moment of emancipation or celebrating a certain kind of Texas citizenship, but it's about, for me, it's a call to remember in all these rich ways. It's, I'm looking at the quilt behind Miss Lee. It's sort of a call to recognize that great patchwork quilt that makes us who we are as a nation. And I know that this book is doing a great service for those who are going to pick it up and read it. And I suspect you'll get a whole new bump in the audience thanks to the Senate's action, hopefully the House's action. Ms. Lee, you said you've been very busy all day long and thinking, bringing us up to the present day again. What's next? What's next for Juneteenth?
Well, the news that the Senate has passed the bill has me in a tizzy because I'm wondering if I need to go to Washington and buttonhole some representatives, or if I sit here in Texas and wait until they make up their mind that they're going to do it too. Of course, Saturday is our Juneteenth right here in Fort Worth.
Yes.
And last year, because we couldn't do a parade, I walked the 2.5 miles to symbolize that the enslaved were free for 2.5 years. I thought we'd have 5, 10 cars. We had 300 cars that followed me.
Wow.
So we're going to do it again this year. And we start at 10 o'clock in California. They're going to start at 8. Atlanta, Philadelphia, New York will start at 11. It's like simulcast or something. And we'll be seeing and doing what others are doing for Juneteenth. It's going to be fabulous. And so I'm looking forward to it. I know Juneteenth is beginning to mean something to people who never even given it. They never given it a thought.
Yes.
But I think it's coming to the forefront. And I think we need to keep pushing. I told them that the Black Lives Matter, if I was younger, I'd have been there with the rest of those youngsters, Nothing has ever been given to us. We've had to push for it.
Yes.
We've had to work for it. And I think we may have to push to make those young people understand that we need Juneteenth as a national holiday.
That's beautiful. And if there are younger people listening, and I hope you are, here's a model for you. 94 years young, out there, walking the walk and talking the talk. That's just, it's moving. It's moving and it's humbling. And it underscores the importance of this moment. Annette, I'm going to turn it back to you. I mean, this book is newly out, and you're making the electronic rounds. This is, as you put it, this is for someone who writes slowly, as I do. The fact that you just threw this book together so quickly during COVID is humbling to me. What is next for you and your projects? I mean, you talked earlier about, this either is going to be a very short book or a much longer book. And you're such an important historian. You've done such important work puncturing different mythologies in this country. And, is there more Juneteenth coming from you? Is there more family history coming? Is there text? Has this satisfied your desire to write Texas history, or is there more coming from that?
There may be coming later, but the immediate thing I have to do is the second volume of the Hemmings family story.
Okay.
So I'm taking the family after Monticello, through the Civil War, and dropping them off at the beginning of the 20th century. So it's back to the Hemmingses.
Will there be Juneteenth celebrations in the Hemmings family history?
Maybe I will look for that.
It might be there.
You
It
never
might be
know.
there. So I wonder, Miss Lee, I want to move towards wrapping up the program. Do you have a final statement that you want to share with the audience?
Yes, I'm wanting you to ask your listeners to go to opalswalktodc.com, find the link, and give us their signature. We've taken 1,500,000 signatures to Congress, and we want to take another 1,500,000 signatures, and they can help us. They could begin to call their representatives and ask them to sign on to the bill. Those are things that they can do. And then I know some school, I've written a little book called Juneteenth for Children. Oh, that is. I want people to be aware of it. And then there's one by Dr. Charles Taylor, Juneteenth, a Celebration. Young people need to read these books. They really do. And so we can pass that information on to them.
Yes.
You know?
Absolutely. I thank you for that. And Annette, a closing word before I turn it over to a staff member.
Well, to a staff member. Well, this was a wonderful event. I'm an honor to be in the presence of Miss Lee, who's done so much for this holiday. And I'm just, is so jazzed about the possibility that this could become a national holiday and all that means, the work that we can do as historians to make sure that this is taken seriously. It's about education. It's about fun and celebration, but about education as well, and agitation too.
Absolutely.
Could I add something?
Yes.
Have you young people read Isabella Wilkerson's Caste?
Yes.
Okay. I'm so glad. Oh, I am, because I tell everybody they need to read that book. Yeah.
It's an important story about, and I think in a more compact way, Annette is doing the work that Isabel does in hers, talking about all the different ways that we are formed together as a society, and it's a complicated narrative. Juneteenth has its own evolving narrative, and I was going to say complicated, but maybe with the federal action becoming less complicated, which is really exciting, which is very exciting. But I want to thank both Annette Gordon-Reed, pardon me, and Ms. Opal Lee for joining us tonight. It's been a complete pleasure engaging in this wide-ranging conversation, and I'm certainly pleased to have been an active fly on this wall. And I want to turn it back over to an Arts and Letters Live to have a proper closing to this really exciting evening.
Thank you all for joining us, and many thanks to Annette Gordon-Reed, Dr. Jonathan Holloway, and Ms. Opal Lee. Signed copies of On Juneteenth are available for purchase online at shopdma.org and will be shipped directly to you at home. Book sales benefit the museum, and DMA members receive a 10% discount on purchases. We have several upcoming events we hope you'll join us for, including Kevin Kwan, Cheryl Strayed, and many more. Check out our list of events at dma.org/ALL. Sign up to receive our emails and join our Arts and Letters Live group on Facebook. Arts and Letters Live's 30th season kickoff and virtual programs are presented by PNC. I'd also like to thank our Arts and Letters Live season supporters, the K. Catarula Endowment for the Literary and Performing Arts, and the McGee Foundation Arts and Letters Live Endowment Fund at the DMA. Major support is provided by the Hirsch Foundation. The Fairmont Hotel Dallas is the exclusive hotel partner, and promotional support is provided by KERA. Special thanks to our partner for this event, the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth, and our promotional partners, the Black Academy of Arts and Letters, the Dallas Institute of Humanities and Culture, and the African American Museum of Dallas. Also, thanks to Norton for help making this event possible. And as always, thanks to the DMA's ingenious AV team that makes it all work. Thanks and good night.